The Turkish film director Nuri Ceylan has been cited often in this channel, first in the analysis of his 2002 film Uzak, known as Distant, an apt introductory work in the director's filmography, and in the later analysis of one of the most significant scenes in Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, the outstanding 2011 Turkish masterwork, whilst his name is bound to pop up as well whenever the subject of Ingmar Bergman's expert dissection of personal interrelations and psychology of emotions is mentioned, with many of Ceylan's films presenting, in line with the work of the famous Swedish director, a persistent focus into the intricate gearbox that coordinates human behavior and its associated paradoxes and capriciousness. As mentioned in the previous videos on Ceylan, besides the clear penchant for complex relations mired in vanity, selfishness, obsession, or incommunicability, often at the brink of crumbling, his work is characterized as well by a strong emphasis on aesthetic presentation, a cinematic approach that is rigorous in its many aspects, whether it is in its framing, color, texture, movement, or lighting, which betray his background as a photographer, an approach that is thoroughly captivating and ultimately leading to an engagement with the narrative structure and plot tone in an organic manner that does not come off as mere aestheticization for the sake of producing pretty pictures. This photographic sensibility is in many instances expressed brightly in ample and sprawling landscape vistas, in which his characters occasionally find themselves faced with during their travels or wanderings, either in urban or country settings, particularly in moments of inner turmoil, in which, besides convincingly setting a mood without resorting to music, as most films do, serve the more important purpose of giving a comprehensive perspective of the character's emotional backdrop, amplifying the manifested disposition by either similarity or contrast. Take for instance the shot from Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, assessed in an earlier video, which in itself works as a masterclass of plot introduction through bare but meticulous dialogue, succeeding without employing extensive exposition, but which also masterfully sets the tone to be followed by the rest of the film through its rhythmic and visual rendering. In the 2014 Palme d'Or winner Winter Sleep, the barren, rugged mountains are suitable as a visual analogy for Aydin's coldness, his stark personality and emotional unavailability, and in more than one occasion, Aydin is induced to reflect on his downward path as well as on his actions and conduct towards his acquaintances, especially his estranged wife, Nihal, the shot by the graveyard being one of the most striking instances. There is also a shot in his latest work, The Wild Pear Tree, in which the astounding canvas comprised of the sight of the expansive lowland, forests, lake and mountains emerging in the background, in tune with the carefree and inebriated state of the group of friends, impels Sinan to disrupt Riza's mood, after pondering on the insignificance of oneself on the grand scheme of things and the constructive role of disappointment and failure. Using the revelation of the betrayal of Riza's ex-girlfriend with him in an undeniable demonstration of gloating and self-loathing simultaneously, personality traits ostensibly made visible throughout the film, Sinan seeks to guide Riza, perhaps a tad too bluntly, to a more conscious understanding of life, which predictably ends in a confrontation, all within an idyllic backdrop. In this short video essay, the pictorial quality of one powerful scene in his 2008 work Three Monkeys shall be assessed in more detail, and a reflection on its form and contents will take place, so as to highlight the individual aspects that work together to produce the power that conspicuously emanates from that scene in specific, and thereby also demonstrate an approach by the spectator that will benefit his apprehension in other films as well. Three Monkeys is a peculiar piece in Ceylan's career mosaic, a path that displays an ever-increasing appreciation by the critic and festivals. In regards to the Cannes Film Festival, for example, the Grand Prix and Best Actor awarded to Distant in 2002 was followed immediately by a Fipresci Award for Climates, which in turn led to an award for Best Director with Three Monkeys, then followed by the Grand Prix for Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, and finally a prestigious Palme d'Or for Winter Sleep in 2014. In this sense, Three Monkeys represents not only an important step towards Ceylan's acknowledgement as a distinguished filmmaker, but a necessary and skillful work for his ever-refining vision of humanity as expressed through his works. In a terse presentation of the film's plot, one could say that it involves a family of three, a father called Eyüp, in prison after accepting a payment to play guilty for a crime his boss committed, his wife Atser that works in a factory, and their young adult son Ismail. After failing the college entry exams again and listening to her mother's concern, Ismail suggests his mother to ask for an advance sum of money from his father's boss, Servet, which she eventually acquiesces. Albeit the spectator observes Acer meeting with Servet to request the money and the latter offering her a ride back home, there are only a handful of scenes that hint at the outcome that will unfold therefrom. It is especially when the scene in focus in this video comes in that one fully comprehends the degree of involvement, physical and emotional, between Acer and Servet. It appears then that both developed a sexual relationship, which for Acer became fulfilling from a psychological standpoint and something she is not willing to relinquish, but which for Servet was comprised of mere sexual attraction, with scarce emotional investment and therefore not worth sustaining. It is in this contrasting duo of expectations and the inevitable clash that arises from it that the spectator finds himself in this remarkable scene. Other than the terrific dramatic power and dynamic of the scene, in which both characters reveal a psychological facet unseen until then, what strikes immediately is how the scene has been framed, with the camera standing from a considerable distance of the event. Just like in the aforementioned scene in Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, the spectator is kept at bay, whilst the characters remain in the same spatial location for the most part, for one long uninterrupted take. Their facial features are indiscernible given their distance, which would have been unacceptable in an otherwise typical film for such a decisive moment in the narrative, but nevertheless the content and tone of the dialogue is clear as day, effectively allowing the viewer to mentally apprehend the faces by himself. They stand in a secluded area, where they are unlikely to get interrupted, hence disclosing the secrecy of their meeting. There's an overcast sky, which in its fading light, with greenish tones and ominous grey clouds, further enhances the uninviting feel of the scene. Adding to that, the whistle of the wind, with its periodic throbbing and chilly air, in a film that until then had been characterized by mostly sunny weather and characters struggling to cope with the heat, often appearing with a sweaty countenance and refreshing in front of electric fans, together with the cheerless cawing of the crows, turns the mood of the scene into a rather dark and somber depiction of a fatally compromised relationship. And yet, there is a sort of strange, unassuming beauty surrounding it. Regardless of their place of standing, the canvas holds enough depth to ascertain the two riverbanks and the river itself, the ephemerality of life and its events reflected on the incessant, if slow, pace of the clouds, which is artfully captured by the framing of the shot that illustrates several horizontal layers, a stratification of variegated nature, but it is this exact emphasis and space allocated to the sky that also confers to the characters a sense of smallness amidst their world. In the history of Western painting, such stylistic portrayals of landscape had been employed by Dutch artists of the Golden Age who, having followed the tradition and initial incursions of earlier Flemish painters such as Joachim Patinier or Pieter Bruegel the Elder, who were amongst the first artists to convey the surroundings of their characters not in a relation of submission to them or as mere spatial ornament to dress the human action, but as having major, if not the decisive focus of the composition itself. Following in their tracks, it was during the explosion of ingenuity and creativity of arts in the Netherlands during the 17th century that this focus was perfected into a style of its own. A more realistic approach adopted by the artists then meant the sight was now seen from ground level, with lower horizons that gave up space for cloud formations to become more emphasized, which were not only typical of the region, but which also provided light conditions more appeasing to the eye. From 1620 on, there developed what art historians have categorized as a tonal phase, in which more efforts were put into illustrating atmospheric effects, smaller human figures that were sometimes completely absent, diagonal compositions, and the presence of water, either through rivers or the sea. Despite most of these portrayals of Dutch land and nature being rarely symbolic, and rooted in a lack of mannerist embellishment, in the paintings of Jacob van Ruysdael, one of the great landscape artists of the era, and the nephew of an uncle as accomplished as he was, called Solomon van Ruysdael, the crowds are regularly depicted as volatile, seemingly in transition, as if weather conditions were about to shift, with grey clouds seeming to aggregate. There is a clear sense of transience, of impermanence that trespasses the whole creation, a glimmer of philosophical awareness of existence. In Ceylan's canvas, there is also a somewhat matter-of-factness and lucid understanding of ephemerality. Much like the Dutch landscape works of art, the sky has taken at least half of the picture, with its characters almost reduced to mere staffage, small players in a gargantuan, eternal game of love and hatred, life and death. Without removing the spectator entirely from the narrative, as the dialogue remains utterly perceptible and crystalline, Ceylan has introduced a commentary on mankind and the passions that assail our existence, something which certainly wouldn't be as indelible had it been portrayed with a closer framing, as one can witness. In the same way, had the sky not been overcast, not only would the light been massively different, with stronger contrasting highlights and shadows, but the framing employed would have lost much of its significance, leaving a meaningless empty space above the locus of the action. Adding the windy environment and the cawing of the crows leaves the spectator with a textured scene in visual and audio terms, and an underlying subtext that enriches our perception of the action and the thought of the creator. An even closer comparison in the realm of painting might perhaps be found in a work of Caspar Friedrich, a painter associated with German Romanticism, an artistic current arisen at the end of the 18th century, and which attempted to synthesize art, science and philosophy in a unified system of culture which, among various values, particularly extolled and praised beauty. In many of Friedrich's paintings of bewildering beauty, there's a deep sense of melancholy and forlornness, and one of the most eminent among those is The Monk by the Sea. The composition resembles the shot in Three Monkeys in that it concedes extensive space for an overcast sky by a body of water, forcing its character into a tiny visual reference, with Heinrich von Kleist, the famous German dramatist, having commented that one senses the voice of life in the rush of the water, in the blowing of the wind, in the drifting of the clouds, in the lonely cry of the birds. No situation in the world could be more sad and eerie than this, a feeling that could be applied just as aptly to Ceylan's cinematographic canvas. The reference of Friedrich will no doubt strike as familiar to viewers acquainted with Ceylan's other films, for in many of those, one will also find shots resembling another notorious painting of his called Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, in which a character is seen with his back facing the camera, while a broad landscape side stretches in front of him. Hopefully this deconstruction and contextualization will help you interpret and savor future film viewings, not only by the hand of Ceylan, but from other filmmakers as well. When watching a film by a thoughtful director, one ought to realize that things are rarely captured by accident or depicted unwittingly. Hence, our attention as viewers may only benefit our experience and help us understand the art created by another person. By being mindful of what one watches, entire worlds unfold in one's mind, and at least the intent shall be achieved, which is to make one reflect upon what one is seeing, instead of unconcernedly consuming the creation as a mere time-passing distraction. As always, thank you for listening and see you next time.